Welcome to the Top Secret Wedding Podcast, and today's quick tip is don't be afraid to say no, because for everything that you say no to, it opens a door to say yes to something else. Let's go.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
This is the Top Secret Wedding Podcast, where we share top secret tips to help you take your wedding game to the next level.
I'm Annika, and I'm a wedding coordinator, enthusiast, and venue manager for one of the best venues in Idaho.
I'm Chris, and I'm a DJ, master of ceremonies, and all-around lover of weddings.
We're on a mission to improve weddings and wedding professionals everywhere.
So today we are talking about when to say no.
Yep.
I don't know about you, but especially when I was first getting started, saying no was really difficult.
Oh, yeah. I know, like, when I was first starting, I was terrified to say no. It was like, no, I'm going to bend over backwards and say yes to everything to make this happen.
Yeah, because, I mean, especially when you're starting a business, you want all the business that you can take. And I think there's a certain value in that, in taking the business that you can and learning the lessons of what you want to say no to. But eventually you learn, like, there are certain things that you want to do and there are certain things that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And you don't learn that unless you go through the fire, I guess.
Yeah. I do think, we're going to, on this podcast, give tips and advice on when to say no and how to say no. But ultimately, I do think it is something that everybody figures out on their own,
Hopefully.
One way or another. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So let's start with when to say no. Like, when is just starting out, when you're going through meeting with your clients, when is the time to say no?
Yeah. So, I mean, this has always been really hard for me because I always tell my staff, like, no, like, that's not my job, is not in our vocabulary.
Right.
We are team players. We're going to get it done. But with that being said, there is a time to say no. I don't know. What would you say?
So I think, there's certain boundaries, right? If somebody asks me, Chris, can you come DJ for my wedding? Oh, also, can you bring the food? Nope, not doing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's clear boundaries. It's especially on wedding day, I think, is when it can get very difficult because somebody can ask you to do something that you don't want to do. For instance, one of my hard lines is I will not touch the cake. I'm not going to move the cake. Yeah. I've just seen too many YouTube videos where people drop the cake that I don't want to be that guy.
For sure.
Nope, not touching the cake. I'll, put the stuff by the cake, but I'm not going to move the cake. So I think looking at what your business is and what you want your business to be, and if what somebody is asking you to do does not fall in line with that, that's when you start saying no. Mm-hmm. And there's always the opportunity to bend the rules a little bit because maybe you like this client a little bit more and you're willing to do it. But there are certain things that, this might be something that you have to sit down and write out a list. But you may already know what you want to do and what you don't want to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing to add with that is you mentioned, maybe you like this client, you want to help them out. It's important to make sure they're aware, like, hey, I normally don't do this, but, you want to make sure that's there. That way they're not able to just be like, oh, yeah, he did this for me, blah, 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 blah. But it's also going to give them a chance to be grateful for that extra effort.
Yep.
I feel like a lot of times if we say, okay, we'll do it, it's almost like the client is wanting it their way, and so they're not as grateful. But if you're like, hey, normally I do not do this,
totally,
then they're going to be extra grateful for that extra effort.
Yeah. And I think, the clients that, I mean, this is general rule of business, but the clients that pay more, they expect less, right? And I've found that I've had to say no a lot more to the clients that pay less.
Yeah.
Because they're asking for more. They're asking for things that are outside of what I normally do.
Totally.
There's the Pareto principle. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I
haven't. It's the 80-20 rule. So 80% or 20% of your clients will take 80% of your time, right?
Okay, yeah.
So, and the goal is to be able to flip that. So you want 20% of your efforts to make up 80% of your business. So you just kind of maximize your time. The problem is the lower paying clients, they're the ones that are asking for 80%. And so you have to look at your business and look at what your product offerings are. And if what they're asking, like I said before, if what they're asking you to do doesn't match up with what you're offering, then likely it's going to be eating into your profits.
For sure.
So, which I kind of wanted to talk about that. When you say no, we set this up at the top of the show, but when you say no, it allows you to say yes to something else, which I think is way more powerful. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But actually, let's talk about that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So if a client comes to you and they say, hey, I really want fireworks at my wedding. And I remember, I don't know if you were there, but years ago, there was a wedding at LaBelle Lake. And
Okay.
They asked for fireworks.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it is now it's a policy that you don't have fireworks at LaBelle Lake. And it wasn't because of this client, but they knew the effect that they wanted.
Yeah.
It didn't end up working out because of some day of difficulties, but they did have fireworks, but it didn't give them the effect that they wanted.
Okay. Yeah.
So as the professionals, we can kind of ascertain what they're after. They want this awesome moment at the end of the wedding, and maybe we can offer them a different solution.
Yeah, for sure. A different solution that's going to give them that result that they want and be better overall.
Yep, and maybe cheaper too.
For sure. Yeah.
So I think that's when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I really, really want to do this, and you just know that is not something that you'll do, not something that you want to do, then, you know, there's a couple of rules that we use. Like, a bad thing to say, if you know that this is not something that you want to do, that you're going to do, you shouldn't say, let me think about that.
Exactly. Because you're giving them false hope. That's the thing.
Right.
You know, if you know without a doubt, hey, I don't want to do this, why would you keep it lingering?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
So that's the first thing. Don't tell them, don't give them false hope. But the second thing is, you know, if you are with a client that they just keep pushing that boundary, keep pushing it, then at some point you may have to say, I might not be the best fit for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be a whole different podcast, but
For sure. Yeah.
it can be really difficult, but also really liberating
Exactly.
to get rid of a client. The way that I phrase it is clients that are a little bit harder to love, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So there are some clients that are harder to love, and then there are other clients that they don't want that love. So
Uh-huh.
you say, you know what, I might not be the best fit. And for us, we try and weed that out on sales calls.
Yeah.
If they say, hey, I really want this, 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 and this. And like one of the things that we drew a hard line in a long time ago was we will not be hired for house parties for teens that they want really dirty music. It just makes me
Gotcha.
feel weird inside.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So so when that comes to me, then I'll say, oh, you know what? There's this other DJ, and I think he'd actually be a better fit because we mainly focus on weddings, or I give them
Yeah.
some reason, right? I don't want to lie to them, but I also don't want to put myself in a position where I'm going to be kind of compromising my standards.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
So, so I think you have to be direct either way, right? And that's
Mhm.
not something I'm willing to do, or, you know what, this other person's going to be a better fit.
Yeah. Going with that too, I think it's so important to have that community aspect where you have other people to refer that client to. You know, a big thing for us is the time of the wedding. We give our clients 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., but
Right.
we don't go past 11 p.m. You know, our venue's in a neighborhood area. It's a hard no. We don't go
Yeah.
past 11. And if we get a client who is like, oh, well, I really want to go until midnight or 1 or 2 or whatever, it's a very flat, I'm so sorry, we're not able to do that.
Right.
But here is a list of other recommended vendors or venues. So you want to have that list to provide them something. That way you're still giving them something of value, and it's not just, nope, we won't do it.
Yep.
Goodbye,
100%.
see ya. You want to give them some kind of value.
Yeah. Because the other thing I found that, you know, if somebody calls me and I can't help them, I try, especially if it's a date that I'm not available for, I try and do everything in my power to help them find another vendor. Because the reason that I got into this is not just to make money. I mean, that's a necessity. But the reason I got into this is because I love weddings, and I really, really love helping people get the most out of their day.
Yeah.
And I've often said to clients, you know, I want you to have a perfect wedding day, even if we can't be there. So having that group, that community of people that you know and trust to be able to send to them, it's valuable. And, you know, hopefully they send back to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good point.
I just got to say, I love what you just said about I hope you have an amazing wedding day, even if we're not there. That's just, again, falls back to the basics of being personable, but like, that's just so important. So I love that.
It is. I mean, I remember years ago, there was somebody that called me and they said, yeah, I tried to get in touch with this DJ, but he said, yeah, I don't want to DJ your wedding. Like, I cannot imagine saying that to somebody. I mean, there have been times that I've thought it, but I would never, ever say that. Again, it goes back to those guiding principles that we set up of, you know, why I got into business.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of something that you said, you know, we can't do this, but.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. I think it's really, really important to be able to guide your clients through the wedding process, because I'm sure we've said this on the podcast before, but we do this every single weekend. They do this once or twice in a lifetime, hopefully once, right?
Hopefully once.
So we've seen things that, you know, they haven't seen before as far as, you know, being able to give their guests a certain experience. So they can't say yes to something that they don't know exists.
True. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, for example, one thing that we do is we do a love story, which is one of my favorite things to do.
They're so good.
A lot of reasons. But I'll just give you a basic of, for those that haven't seen a love story. I know a lot of DJs across the country, they do it. But it's basically, so I collect their love story. I interview the couple and I find out how they met, how they fell in love, what attracted them to each other, the proposal, the whole deal. And then we tell that story just before their first dance, typically. And the reason that we do this is, one, so I can get to know the couple better.
For sure.
But two, to set a beautiful tone for their first dance. It also allows me to kind of customize and personalize their day because of things that I know about them. But this is something that a client would never ask for.
Yeah, exactly. Because they don't even know it exists.
Right. So a lot of times what clients will come to me with is, hey, Chris, we really don't want our first dance to be awkward. So can you invite everybody up to dance with us? And that's a personal pet peeve of mine. I don't love that because it's not everybody else's moment. It's your moment. And we can shorten the song. That's not bad. But bringing everybody up, it's not going to be memorable for you.
Yeah.
Right? So when they say that, what they're really telling me is, Chris, I don't want our dance to be awkward. How do we fix this? And I say, hey, I got an idea for you. Let's tell your love story. So this is it's not something they would have thought of. And there are countless things, whether it's the way that we're setting up tables, right? Or if it's, I'm trying to think of other vendors, like, first looks. That's probably something that came out of that, right?
Oh, totally. Totally.
So, meeting with them, and instead of just shutting them down and saying no, trying to find a solution. Yeah. And I found that typically the easiest way to find that solution is to ask them questions. If they say, I really want to do this, or I really don't want to do this, and you don't see a clear path to it, dig a little bit deeper and ask them, why do you want to do this? Like, what's your motivation? What's your goal here? And usually there's something under the surface that they have an anxiety about something, or they're really excited, or they saw a TikTok, right?
Yeah.
And they want to recreate it. So instead of just saying no, telling them, well, let's look at these other options.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you mentioned it earlier where this is hopefully the only day they're ever going to have a wedding day. Right. And so they're just not aware of the options. And so just enlightening them on like, hey, you don't want this to be awkward. Here's a list of options. If they don't know it exists, they can't say, yes, I want that. But you present it to them and you might just light their fire and be like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that would be awesome. Let's do it, Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, that's always fun to like give them something that they're like, oh, I'm going to put this on TikTok and other people are going to copy us, what I mean?
Yeah.
So one of the, there's a couple of phrases that I go by. One is the answer is yes. Now, what was the question? And I've heard Alan Berg say this tons of times. But you want to find a way to fulfill for your clients, whatever it is, right? And of course, we talked about there are hard lines that you draw, but start with, I want to find a way to do this for you, right? So that's one. And the other phrase that I always go by is, and I always say it wrong when I say it out loud, but it might not be your fault, but it's your responsibility to fix it. So just because it rained just before the ceremony, that's clearly not your fault. But if you want your guests to have a good experience and not to sit in wet chairs, then it's your responsibility to go wipe those chairs off. Doesn't matter if you're the florist or the DJ or the venue. If you want the clients to have a good experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do think too, there is it gets so tricky, but there is a line between setting a boundary and saying no, but still also being flexible and giving the client their dream day. Like you said, you can't control the weather. If it rains, maybe it's not in your contract that, hey, I'm going to go wipe chairs, but be flexible and, help give that experience to your clients of not having their guests sit in wet chairs. For me, that's an easy, we'll go do that. Yep. Right. Easy. So.
Yeah. I love it. Are there any things that you've had to say no to that you can think of as from a venue perspective?
Yeah. So, fireworks are a big one.
Yeah. But so why?
Mostly just because of the unpredictableness and fire hazard. We're a log cabin. It's,
Yeah.
One that it's kind of similar, but we've only said yes to this one time, and is the worst thing ever. But the super pretty lantern float off, Tangled, right? Oh man, I was having a heart attack because everyone's sending them up. It's really pretty, but guess what? There are trees everywhere. And suddenly I'm these are open flames. They're going to hit. So I'm beelining it and sending them above the trees because they're not making it,
Oh my goodness.
It was so scary. The other things, hard lines are the noise ordinance.
Yeah.
Music has to be off by 11 p.m. That's just the city rules. So hard line for us.
Yeah.
We also are pretty strict with alcohol on the premise. Yeah. So we are alcohol friendly, but we do have an alcohol policy to help with that. And it's just that any mixed drinks or hard liquors, the only way they can be on property is with a licensed bartender bartending those.
Which I think is, and I haven't heard, I've heard this from a lot of other venues in the area too, that they have problems when there's too much alcohol.
Yeah. Well, and I honestly think we didn't used to, pretty much all policies come from an incident, unfortunately. So we didn't used to be super strict with our alcohol policy. It was alcohol is welcome.
Yeah.
But, people get a little too tipsy and things get a little too crazy. And now we have a policy. But since having that policy in place, not only does it protect us, but it protects our guests, it protects the property, and it honestly makes it a more enjoyable experience for everybody there, Yeah,
those boundaries are actually pretty important, I think.
Yeah. So, and I think that is something that can be said for almost all boundaries is, it might not be fun setting the boundary, but it's going to make it more enjoyable for you and or the clients. Totally. It's going to make everyone have a better time. It's going to be better overall. Might be awkward to set it, but once it's set, you're golden.
Yeah. And we didn't really discuss this beforehand, but how do you know when your boundary is too far?
See, I kind of wanted to ask you this because what happens if you think you're setting a boundary, but it's a soft boundary and it just keeps getting pushed little by little. And the next thing you know, your boundary's way gone.
Yes.
What do you do about that?
So I think part of it is being in touch with other vendors, other professionals, and seeing what they're doing. I typically see boundaries that are just far too harsh with vendors that are all on their own. There was I'll be very vague about this because I don't want to.
For sure.
Yeah. But there was a venue that I worked at and they said, you have half an hour to set up. And for me as a DJ, That's just not going to cut it. Especially we had to set up in 2 different rooms. So they said half an hour. And so I called them ahead and I said, is there any way? And they're like, no, you only have half an hour. I'm like, okay, fine. So I decided I'd show up early. They're going to let me in. So I go in, I think I'm there an hour before everything starts. So a half an hour before they wanted to let me in. And I went in and I said, hey, I'm here to set up. And they were just setting up tables and chairs and tablecloths and things like that. And I said, hey, I just wanted to see if I can set up. And they're like, no, you have to wait outside until 30 minutes before. And there were a lot of other problems at that venue that day. But it's because they had set boundaries that were unacceptable. Yeah. And it was, the wedding was great, despite the venue.
Yeah.
Or in spite of, despite, is that the same thing?
In spite of?
In spite of? I don't know. I'm going to look it up later. But
I don't know.
so for me, it was very clear that they had not seen what other venues are doing, and they were just trying to set their own thing. And I see that over and over and over again. So I think reaching out, knowing what's the standard for other people. I also think, obviously, there are some boundaries, some legal boundaries, right? Especially when it comes to venues, for safety and all of that kind of stuff. So you have to look at those and make sure that you're abiding by that. But I think it's, again, it goes back to what your guiding principles are. And if you are sending business away because you have too many boundaries, then that might be a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, because again, you want to be flexible, but you need to have those boundaries. And just like you said, if you're sending business away because you're like majority sending business away.
Right. A majority, I should say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's still sometimes you want to say, this is a better fit. Yeah. But if majority of your business is being sent away, then you might need to take a look at it.
Unless you're really, really good. If you're like
that's true.
Top of the line, if you're like David Totera, fine, you can send whatever boundaries you want.
Yeah.
You do a good job. But
totally.
Most of us are not in that box. So but that's a tricky thing, knowing where to set those boundaries. And that's going to be different for every single vendor.
Of course.
But yeah. So
I'm gonna set you another
go
question.
For it, please.
So, because I'm sure someone listening will have this question.
I love it.
But what would you do if a client of yours asked you to do something, you're hesitant, but you say, yeah, I'll do it, and then you start looking through it, and basically you have to retract that yes? How would you go about that?
Okay, so I think, hopefully you learn this lesson earlier than later and know when to say no. But if we've put ourselves in that position and we have to say no, I think it has to be a frank conversation and say, this is not something that, and it really depends on what they're asking you to do. If it's something that's not legal, right, then that's easy. The cop said, I can't do this, right? Or if it's something that falls outside of your job, let's say, for example, somebody wanted me to make a slideshow for them.
Yeah.
I've done it before. But then they start saying, hey, can you also include this video message? And can you also go record this person, right? It starts to kind of escalate. Yes. So I think going back and saying, hey, this is what I agree to. And I'm happy to do these other things that you want me to do. But it is, I can't do it for free. Exactly. I have to charge something for my time. And so I think that's one outlet. Another outlet is, this is a bigger project than I realized it was. And I actually think I've got a really good buddy that is great at this. And go talk to him, go talk to her. They're going to do a great job for you. So again, I think it comes back to not just saying no. Yeah. If it's something that's possible, saying, I can't, but here's another option.
Exactly.
Because if you're just constantly saying no, your clients are going to remember that.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So, no, I love that.
Does that answer that?
Yeah, I think those are great answers.
Whew. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are great answers, And I think just adding to that a little bit, it's not the ideal option, but ultimately, if you're just getting to the point where you're like, hey, this has turned into a way bigger project than I thought it was, there is a point to, I don't want to say cut your losses, but take what you've experienced, learn to set those boundaries
Right.
and implement it moving forward.
Yeah.
I had a situation where I had to do that, and it just kept escalating. And can you do this? Can you do this? And next thing I know, it was way bigger than what I thought it was going to be. And it was one of those things where, like, okay, it's her actual wedding day. I'm not going to go and have this conversation on the wedding day. So you have to just swallow it
Yep.
and take what you've learned and said, okay, this is what I've learned. This is what I'm implementing, and move on from it.
Yeah. You just got to suck it up and go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, that's happened to me multiple times
Uh-huh.
and is the reason why I have certain policies in place.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. So cool.
Okay.
Well, hopefully you've learned to say no and when to say no. If you have any thoughts or ideas about some experiences that you've had, feel free to message us, email us, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Top Secret Wedding Podcast.
Subscribe, rate, and review us, and we'll see you next time.